the other one, you bastard!
Brought to you by Robotoyz. More information in a moment.
Let's take things back a few years to 2017. Legends isn't quite in its infancy, but it's sort of just chugging along at its own pace alongside the big boys of third party. Really, there are only two main competitors, Iron Factory and the combined forces of DX9 and Unique Toys, prior to their split. If you want to go for a G1 styles collection, your only real option was the DX9 and Unique Toys lineup. MechFans Toys was barely a thing at the time and no one else was making G1 styles Legends. Yes, no one at all. Strangely enough, no one seemed to tackle an Optimus Prime at this scale. Dutch wouldn't release until 2018, and Skypillar wouldn't fumble onto the scene until a year after that. If you wanted a Legends-scaled Optimus Prime, you basically had to choose between the Thrilling 30 version or figurative anus juice. It's hard to imagine such today, but back then we didn't have enough Optimus Primes in the Legends scale. Of course, one company took notice of this. It was a somewhat opportunistic decision in a marketing sense, but many went along with it anyway, since it was the only third-party G1-esque Legends Prime on the market. And as a result, it still finds its way into many collections to this day. Greetings, Cybertronians, I'm DrLockdown, and today's diagnosis pertains to Generation Toy GT05 Leaders Set. That's Leaders with an S because apparently rolling off the tongue is something this company has never heard of. Now, figures take time to design. Often you're looking at a year and a half minimum, from sketching to tooling to testing to downing that beer next to your Bold Forms Gladius. This release, however, feels a bit different. From how quickly it was announced to how widely it was available, it almost seems like it was a reactionary release, coming out to capitalize on a market's void. Now, reactionary releases aren't necessarily bad. Designers can look at something, realize mistakes were made, and correct them on their own design, but they still take the same amount of time to produce. Unless, of course, you've already got the design on the back burner like Core Star and supposedly Crimson Wings. Just a hypothesis on the latter of those, though. Now, for this case, it's sort of reactionary and sort of not. Initially, these were model kits included with special releases of Generation Toys combiners, continuing the Robotoyz tradition seen with Shockwave and Grimlock, since apparently Generation Toy is an offshoot of Warbatron. Third-party evolution is weird. One day you've got shitty Kubian Bao knockoffs, the next you're dealing with Deformation Space Crimson Wings. That aside, essentially these are pre-assembled model kits with shiny new paint jobs, and if you'd assume that turning a model kit into a full figure would be a disaster for build quality, you'd be right. However, it's not extremely noticeable for Tyrant over here, and yes, that does make determining which is which more difficult, since Generation Toy has used the name Tyrant on both a Prime and a Megatron. Yes, not confusing at all. As for Prime himself, this one pretty easily fits into the stylized end of the 3-piece spectrum. And as far as Legend-scaled Prime trucks go, this is probably one of the better ones. The cab is certainly much cleaner than most, with minimal paneling nonsense and a clear central idea on show. It's got the short window long grille combo that we've seen on this channel previously with Giga Raiden, but the overall proportions have been heavily squared out. I really love the aqua windows they've chosen here. They pop extremely well against the metallic red surrounding it. Speaking of, to try and offset some of the wibbly plastic, they've coated the thing in a gorgeous metallic red. It's not extremely metallic, kind of sitting a few steps closer to the glossier side of things, but it looks hella premium either way. The silver also looks pretty rad too, providing a consistent stripe around the whole thing. Aside from the grille, that silver is also seen on the vents, bumper, and gas canisters. And the last item on that list really fits in solidly. Primes occasionally have problems with this section, so it's nice to see something this cohesive on such an early third-party Legends Optimus Prime. Not extremely early, mind you, but still pretty early. There's not a lot to get angry over with this design. For the most part, it gets the point across quite well. The back is completely filled in, a rarity for Optimus Primes of this size. And sure, these are clearly the shins just chilling at the back, but at this point I can always bring out the sign and dismiss the criticisms to that. And sure, the feet don't lock in anywhere, but I think we can cut it some slack since this figure doesn't have the benefit of hindsight. The only thing I can really complain about is the use of rubber tires. This is pretty stupid, even taking into account the model kit origins of it. I can't imagine the pain assemblers would have to go through applying these. Now, to be sure, these aren't as flimsy as those found on the hybrid style version, but that doesn't mean I can give them a pass. Typically, rubber tires are installed to provide extra friction for the wheels, and with these, that just ain't happening. The rubber has dried up over time and become incredibly sticky, meaning that it gets stuck on the plastic quite frequently. And beyond that, the screws are far too tight here. Also, said screws have rusted over time for practically no reason, so these wheels are pretty much remaining stationary. Still, it's hardly anything to get pissed off over. There's not much that I can find super egregious. I mean, I guess the bumper doesn't peg together all that well, but that's made up for with the awesome awesome weapon storage. Come on, man, no other Legends Prime does this. That's gotta count for something. When it comes to Starscream's Target Master, though, that uniqueness kind of eases off. It's obvious from the get-go this is following the same 3P-ification of the Walther P-38 scene in pre-MP36 gun modes. Yeah, prior to the quintessential Gunatron release, third-party renditions tended to lean hard into the approximation courts, most likely due to the difficulty of engineering the character in the first place. As such, this isn't a Walther P-38. It's similar, but legally distinct, and honestly, that's okay. There's not much to really get excited over, but for the most part, it provides a decent gun mode. Admittedly, the proportions are a bit wonky, even taking into account the stylization. The chassis is extremely short for a pistol of this nature, and the stock and silencer combo feels hampered with a heavy case of dwarfism. Even the scope feels undersized. However, all of this comes with a purpose. Take a look at the side of the handle and you'll quickly come across a few carefully placed tabs. This is for compatibility with Generation Toy Gravity Builder, possibly the most common third-party Devastator thanks to the billion knockoffs that spawned from it. I don't know who ended up with more bootlegs, this or Hulky. Can't say for certain whether this will work with said bootlegs, but the base functionality explains why most of the proportions are weird. Still, I do kinda wish the stock was longer. It almost feels super deformed with these current proportions. It's ultimately not hateful, but it could definitely be better. The rest is okay though. The handle has some nice ribbed for their pleasure greebling, and there's a decent amount of mechanical detail on the silver sections. Personally, I could have asked for a lot more, especially since this is going for a stylized look, but it gets the job done. Of course, the trigger section is pretty messy, with hinges galore and the midriff peeking through the panels. But considering this was only the second attempt at a third-party Legends Megatron, I think some slack is required. Plus again, this was meant to be a model kit, so it's damn commendable as is. Although, said model kit tendencies do cause my biggest issue with this figure. Prime wears the model kit's heritage loud and proud thanks to his simple transformation, whereas Megatron sort of fumbles through it. By nature, G1 Megatron is an extremely complicated design that requires a certain finesse to pull off. Generation Toy attempts to do this by taking heavy inspiration from the Reveal the Shield Legion class figure that preceded it. However, unfortunately, they missed the most important mantra of that figure: simplicity reigns supreme. As such, the transformation is a bit of a mess, especially due to the ruddy, stupid struts pulling everything into place. It's not as bad as something like X-Transport's Apollyon, but on a figure this small, it's still easy to consider it pretty bad. The problem gets worse though, since these are designed for easily fitting together as opposed to remaining sturdy after factory assembly. As such, it's incredibly fragile, and things are likely going to break. It's already happened to mine, and I had to repair it with a paperclip. I ended up doing a dodgy job though, and now this whole thing refuses to stay tabbed together. So the question remains, is it my fault for doing a poor repair job, or is it this figure's fault for being so flimsy that it fell apart to begin with? Honestly, I think it's a bit of both. I'm not typically rough on my figures during transformation. It takes a lot for a figure to break on me. Even with how gentle I was on this thing, this shit ended up happening. And sure, your mileage may vary on this, but considering the size of these things, I don't think such is appropriate. Speaking of though, Prime is a bit big for the size class. Honestly, he'd fit more alongside the Hot Soldiers and Mech Fans Toys releases these days, as opposed to Iron Factory or the two main G1 lineup contenders. Interesting that Generation Toy took this route, since it was only really Hot Soldiers doing this at the time, as Mech Fans Toys hadn't started original designs yet. I suppose it's because Megatron was meant to scale with Gravity Builder, and Prime was supposed to scale with Megatron, so it all ended up like that coincidentally. In the end though, I can't really recommend this Megatron if you want him for this mode. I could easily do it for Prime in a heartbeat, but for Megs, there are better options, especially considering this set is somewhat hard to come by these days. Really sucks that the Legends aftermarket is a hellhole, but ah well. Them's the breaks on back collecting. I'm still looking for a set of Iron Factory Dinobots. Of course, most people don't collect Legends figures for the vehicle modes. Well, unless you're doing a Legion set for the movie bots. But outside of that, the robot modes are the most appealing for many people. So, shall we take a look? No? Oh, right, we have to do the sponsorship first. Give me a moment, because today's video is brought to you by Robotoyz. Robotoyz is an Australian-based online toy retailer specializing in all things Transformers. They've got everything you could want, from mainline to select, from third-party to knockoffs. Of course, this set has unfortunately been out of production for some time, but Generation Toys seem to be alive and kicking. But I digress, don't forget to use the special promo code at the checkout if you haven't already. With that out of the way, let's convert these buggers. Now, because of the manner in which these were produced, they are a bit different from what we see with third-party Legends today, and even pretty different in comparison to what Iron Factory and DX9 were doing at the time. Because they didn't really have a point of reference to any existing third-party figures, they were essentially going in blind. And as such, we get some interesting and cool ideas, as well as some weird and just flat-out bad ideas. Now, despite all of this, Optimus Prime still holds up remarkably well. There are a few similarities to existing Primes on the market, just coincidentally, but for the most part, it's pretty original. Not something I've seen on a Legends Optimus Prime, and I would like to see a lot of these little tricks appear on other versions later down the line. Of course, the first thing you want to do is get rid of the gun under here. I still love how we've got weapon storage on this. Hollow parts? Great, just stick the gun under there. I want to see more Primes do that in the future. It's something that I feel has been lost on a lot of modern figures. Because it's gotta be more accurate, I suppose. Now what you want to do here is just pull the guns out a bit. They're on sort of sliding hinges. Not a fan of that, but it is what it is. And then these rotate down like so. I do wish there was a locking point for these. That's my only real gripe with this transformation, because if these locked in place, it probably would have been damn near perfect. But anyway, we can just leave the legs as is for now and come around to the front and open up this section here. It's tabbed into the top here and it also clicks into itself. You can also then bring these front bits down and peg them into themselves like so. That should allow you to slowly bring this down like so. Be careful though, because it will go over these two back pieces. And from here, we can now start to bring the arms out, and they seem to do an Optimus, as they call it on first glance. But actually, there's a really neat trick. These rotate backwards and rotate around. That way, it keeps the silver stripe on the inside and the red toon accurate part on the outside. Now, I don't give a flying f about toon accuracy, but if you have to do it, well, that's a really clever trick to do it. Of course, the arms pop out of there, and yes, they leave hollow cavities, but oh no, who gives a shit. Now, this is on a single hinge for both of them. It rotates up, and you can bring these back sections here. You've got two tabs there, two slots there, whole thing just pegs together. Waist rotates 180 degrees, and this part's really interesting. These bits slowly rotate around whilst pushing back, and they sort of move in like that, sort of violently once you get them to a certain point. But they move back and they rotate around, and in the process, the grill actually pulls back as well, and angles, which means then all you have to do is bring up the side of the midriff and we're done. So essentially this and this is all real. None of it's faux parts. That's pretty commendable for a really early design like this. Anywho, these bits open up like so, and it's easier if you separate them, but then you've got a double hinge that rotates out like that, and make sure you rotate it back and into place as well, because then that little platform there will act as a tab for this slot here. It all clicks together and remains nice and solid. Seems like there's no tabs, but there are, and it's pretty neat. Come to the feet and fold out the toes, and last but not least, you come around to the back and we get the dramatic head reveal by pulling out the back panel and bringing up the head like so, and then collapsing it again. So all in all, a pretty neat transformation with some pretty clever ideas. Nothing too complicated, but then again, it's an Optimus Prime. You don't have to make it complicated. With the way the chest and arms work, I'd really like to see some of these ideas on future Transformers, as I've said before. But well, it hasn't been seen since, and they've got other ideas these days, so it is what it is, I guess. So in the end, Prime is pretty good. Megatron, however, can get this transformation just stinks. Now, I mentioned earlier how it was inspired by the Reveal the Shield version. Well, how exactly? It's mostly in the way everything functions, the way the arms fold out, the way the chest rotates around to there, and the way the legs flip out. Of course, it's just the layout of the transformation. The transformation itself is a lot more amateurish. It's kind of depressing that a high-budget third-party Legends figure has a worse transformation than a Legion Legends figure from several years ago. But well, it is what it is. First thing you want to do is remove these two bits like that, and it is a bit disappointing. Like the scope, I kind of get it. Most Megatron's parts form that these days, but the stock there, did they have to parts form that? It's a real bummer. Anyway, what you want to do is untab this whole section at the top and rotate it down to the side. Take this section and bring it down like so. Take this section and bring it up like so. Untab the arm like so. That will then give you enough clearance to bring this section and peg it into itself there. And then you can untab this backpack section from the leg there, and oh god, that is a terrible backpack section. You need to keep the arm down like this and bring the arm up like that, which will then give you enough clearance to rotate it around on these tiny struts here. I hate strut-based transformation. It's just such a cop-out. Almost as much as sliding rails. Anywho, then you bring the chest down over the top like that, and this will peg into there like that. This will rotate up like that, rotate around like that, and rotate down on the second hinge like that, for reasons. Double hinges that do basically nothing. You. And then we get to my least favorite part of any transformation, sliding rails. These are definitely going to break over time with how weak the plastic is, but yeah, you also bring out the fists like so. Just this thing so bad. And this is always going to come undone, so you need to reattach that at any chance you get. Come around to the back, open up the back panel, and bring out the head, and it clips up like that. Then you bring this whole section around like so, with both hinges out like that. It's just not a good way of designing this. Then last but not least, we can do the legs. They transform very similarly to Optimus Prime, with the panels popping out like that, separating and then hinging out like that. Bit less elegant here because of the clearance you get with the parts. And once again, like Optimus Prime, you got tab there, slot there, that locks it all together. Doesn't want to stay locked in. What the hell? Finally, there we go. No idea why it's being so stupid there, but it finally gets in there. And last but not least, you want to bring out the heel spurs here, although they really don't accomplish much. Heel spurs are supposed to make it easier to stand with giant backpacks, but this guy is so back heavy and he's just constantly toppling over. Actually, that's not quite the last step. You need to reattach all the parts. Fusion cannon makes sense, like so. Also, one thing I don't really mention in the script, I do like the transparent purple plastic. Very nice touch there. What's not a nice touch is the way the backpack works. That tab is too small for this, but you have to do it anyway because that's the transformation. Which means this thing is constantly popping off, and also it's at an angle because there's not enough clearance, which means it's also constantly popping off because of that. It's just all around a amateurish transformation. Just, it doesn't look like it was designed professionally. Like, at the time, people were saying, oh my god, this is so much better than the shitty Hasbro version, and really? Like, Prime, I can kind of get. He is done pretty damn well, but Megatron is an absolute stinker in this transformation. He doesn't have the worst Legend scale conversion when it comes to Megatrons that I've ever seen, and we'll get to that eventually, but he is awful. Just absolute shit. So yeah, if you can get Prime separately, then he is worth it, and Megatron is not. And I'll get into how you can do that later in the video, but for now, we have to continue with this. We've got some more diagnoses to get to. Now, I don't pretend to be the expert on the history of third party as a whole. Sure, I've catalogued most of its evolution on the Legend side of things, but third party Chug and Masterpiece, not really my scene. That said, from a brief glance of what was coming out at the time, I can gather that 2017 was somewhat of a transitionary phase for the niche. Between the years of 2017 and 2018, third party slowly transitioned from stylized designs to hardline accuracy, and the two members of this set fit very closely into the previous way of doing things. It was a different time. Iron Factory had just released their Bruticus. Fans Project was still around, albeit briefly. That being said, not everything from that period was a winner, as is the case from any lineup. In fact, we've got a pretty good split between the two right here. Starting off on the sunny side of the street, Optimus Prime fits right alongside the pantheon of Generation Toy stylized designs, sort of closer to their stylized combiners than their IDW stuff. Once again, it gives off a similar vibe to old Giga Raiden, although I'm pretty sure this Prime preceded him. Probably coincidence either way though, especially since this is a much wider design. The proportions exist to emphasize that wideness. He takes the Man of Boxes motif and extrudes it to the sides quite a bit. The torso really emphasizes this, retaining the thin windows and medium-sized grille. It makes it seem shorter than it actually is, without fucking with the proportions too much. Interestingly enough, this is all real. Usually you get the windows at most, and nothing at least. But in this case, it's all 100% natural. Faux part haters rejoice! I'd provide the cake if I actually gave a shit about faux parts to begin with. The arms also look really cool with their extra chunkiness tying into the wide boy look. Sure, I would have liked some yellow paint to pick out the arrows on the front of the sleeves, but I get the feeling I'm in the minority on that these days. It's pretty neat how the folding inside out trick hides the silver stripe on the inside of the forearms, making the colors more toon accurate, I suppose. It's not something I particularly care for, but it's a nice touch regardless. And sure, the backs are pretty hollow, but I don't find it that egregious, especially given his model kit's origins. I'm honestly surprised how little kibble this guy ends up with. I get that Optimus Prime is basically the opposite of Megatron engineering-wise. A character done so much it's very hard to get wrong. Even so, the back is clean as a whistle with the way the wheels fold up. Even the legs clean up really well, and my word, what wonderful clompers we have. The chunkiness fits right into the powerhouse design, and the silver provides some much needed breakup. Speaking of, holy shit, there's a lot of silver on this thing. Not even New Age goes this hard with their paint schemes. Generation Toy really went all out in an effort to disguise the fact these were originally model kits. Once again, there's honestly very little I can find fault with here. Really, only two things frustrate me: the gas canisters and the face sculpt. The former I've already gone over with the transformation, and the latter isn't the worst thing in the world. I just don't feel this design fits that well with the rest of the body. It's just too rounded and feels like someone poorly digibashed it onto the damn thing with how small it is. And sure, I dig the light piping they added, but I still think it needed some more time in the oven. Oh well, you don't tend to notice once this figure is in one of its many killer poses. Like seriously, this guy is incredibly well articulated for a figure of its time. His then considered contemporaries weren't doing shit like this. Barely any of them offered foot and waist articulation. Although to be fair, part of this is possible thanks to the size. This is a big beefy boy, once again fitting better with Mech Fans Toys figures. Although at the time it would be more fitting to line him up with Hot Soldier's releases. He may have an aesthetic slightly similar to Iron Factory, but he flat out ain't gonna fit with any of them size-wise. Also, fun fact, some people hypothesized this set was designed by Iron Factory, due to the hands designs. Okay, mates. But going back to the size, this is purely coincidental. They made the Megatron first to fit the Combiner hands, and they needed a Prime to go alongside him. As such, even taking into account that Legends are primarily for play factor and not display, this figure is especially not display friendly. He makes a great desk toy though, especially with his Ion Blaster. It's nothing special, but it's an appropriate accessory that integrates pretty well and accentuates his poses. When it comes to integration with Megasorry though, things don't go so well. In fact, for the most part, this is a bit of a mess. I'll give it this, the aesthetic is adequate, I guess. He does have a lot of silver on show, which is nice, but so does Prime in the end, so it's not unique on that front. The face sculpt is better than Prime though. Sure, the helmet is somewhat weird with how wide it is in comparison to the rest of the design, face or otherwise, but it works. My main issue is that he doesn't have a main issue, but rather a bunch of incredibly small ones that keep piling up until you can't give any more leeway. Yes, this was originally a model kit, and I have to keep stressing that, but that excuse only goes so far. The worst frustration would easily have to be the backpack. This thing stinks! The cannon barrel barely stays plugged in due to the lack of clearance for the tab, meaning it's often better to leave it to the side. The rest of it ain't much better, with panels all over the place that have no locking points, no resting positions, no care, no class, no sanity. The chest area looks nice enough, but the midriff looks flat as a pancake. G1-esque Megatron designs thrive on midriff detail, and this just doesn't have any. The circuitry is haphazard as f***, and because of this, none of it stands out. Yes, they do have to account for the fact this is a model kit, but Gunpla designs do great on their midriff designs quite frequently. You can't even say it's better than the Hasbro version, since the old Thrilling 30 Megatron did this better 2 years prior. Yes, this isn't exactly Megatron since he never released here in Australia, and I'm still hunting down a copy, but you can see on his Moldmate Warpath how they were able to reference the source material yet still try something new. But back on topic, said midriff barely plugs in. Thanks to the weight of the fusion cannon arm, it just randomly comes undone when it feels like it. You might argue that's a result of the fixing I had to do, but nope, it was like this prior to the breakage too. And the articulation, dear god, this is bad, even by the standards of the time. One shoulder barely gets any motion, whilst the other wobbles around awkwardly on a needlessly complicated double hinge. The thighs also get very little outward motion, and the knees don't even get 90. And sure, I've given plenty of leeway to figures with similar issues in the past. Quintesson Bailiff doesn't have much outward shoulder movement, and Kingdom Sideswipe doesn't get a full 90 in the knees. But those examples were minor blemishes on otherwise fantastic figures. Megatron here has far too many issues piled on top of one another, and it ends up bogging down the experience way too much. Combined with a truly abysmal transformation, this might be one of the worst Megatrons in this sizing system I've come across. Not the worst, but definitely down there in the depths. You have to wonder if the designers even likes this figure. The naming of this set is rather difficult to discern, since the box and most of the marketing lists this as the leader set and nothing more. Not even Robotoyz knew what the individual figures were referred to as. The company never gave those names. Only the Chosen Prime calls these figures by their true names: Tyrant and Megasorry. Yep, Megasorry, as if the designers wanted to apologize for what they let loose upon the collecting space. I'm fully aware that criticizing what used to be a model kit is a bit unfair, and to be honest, if only 1 or 2 issues plagued this release, I could easily let it slide. But when they continuously barrage you with problems, patience dries up and anger rises to the surface. Plus, on top of that, he's a big boy for the size class. Again, when you realize the scale they're going for, you kind of expect a bit more, especially since Hasbro did a far better job at 1/10 of the price and 1/4 of the size. Megasorry may have taken much inspiration from this little fella, but it has not retained any of the simple charm. Especially these days, you've got much better options for a legend-scaled Megatron. It's easily one to steer clear from, without a shadow of a doubt. Of course, this does make judging the sets difficult, since they are packed together. It's the same thing as the Quintesson Pit of Judgment. You can't exactly buy these separately. Or can you? See, here's the thing. Who remembers Kubian Bao? In essence, Kubian Bao became Black Mamba, which became Transform Element, which became Deformation Space. Both Tyrant and Megasorry have been KO'd by Kubian Bao, and given the rarity of this set, it's probably a safer bet to just go for the KOs. The set isn't really on the market anyways, since I haven't seen any on sale recently, so why wouldn't you just get the bootleg? Honestly, over that, I can't think of a reason to buy the original. And because of that, this set becomes very easy to grade, not just because you can buy these on the aftermarket separately, but because you can do so pretty damn easily. So, splitting them up, Prime gets a 4 and Megs gets a 2. For obvious reasons. Prime works great as a stylized desk toy, whereas Megatron works at everything. Neither really fits with anything, but I'd be damned if I didn't acknowledge that Prime was pretty fun. In essence, Prime is basically the Giga Raiden of the Legend scale, fighting on his own terms against the grain and going out with class. If I had to decide which of the two was better, I'd probably say Giga Raiden just by a bit, but if you want a Legends Prime and you like the way this looks, well, you know where to look. But tomorrow, instead of discussing a failed attempt in the Legends class, let's discuss a company's last hurrah in it. In case you weren't aware, this is part of the 4th annual Legendary Marathon. 25 videos, 20 mini reviews, and 5 full reviews, the 3rd of which you're watching right now. And tomorrow we're going back to the mini reviews and discussing a company that's near and dear to everyone's hearts. And it's time to remind ourselves why they're so beloved.